Good afternoon. 406 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Miranda Devine, top of the hour from the New York Post. She'll be here. We'll talk to her about Volodymyr Zelensky screwing up his big meeting in the Oval Office Friday. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The cartels are now running scared, at least according to a report out of the New York Times this weekend. President Trump's threats and Mexico's crackdown hit Mexican cartel. They say one cartel leader says he's trying to figure out how to protect his family in case the American military strikes inside Mexico. Another says he's already gone into hiding, rarely leaving his home. Two young men who produce fentanyl for the cartel say they have shut down all of their drug labs. A barrage of arrests, drug seizures, and lab busts by the Mexican authorities in recent months has struck the behemoth Sinaloa cartel, according to Mexican officials in interviews with 6 cartel operatives, forcing at least some of its leaders to scale back on fentanyl production in Sinaloa state, their stronghold. The cartels have sown terror across Mexico and caused untold damage in the United States. But here in Culiacan, the state capital, the dynamic seems to be shifting, at least for now. Cartel operatives say they've had to move labs to other areas of the country or temporarily shut down production. Joining us now to explain what's actually going on here, Ken Cuccinelli is the national chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative. You know him as the former Virginia Attorney General and as the acting Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security previously. Sir, good to have you back with us.
Good to be with you.
The cartels, at least because they have relationships with the New York Times apparently, are saying, it's not a good time for us.
Yeah, well, and the owner of the New York Times is the richest man in Mexico.
True.
Interesting. But we'll see how long it lasts. I mean, how much of this is performative? One of the things that you can't see is, and none of us can, is just how many people at the local, state, and federal level are effectively in bed with the cartels. So it's entirely plausible that a lot of those folks could have just gone to the cartels and said, hey, we have to make our biggest push ever. You guys just have to absorb this punch. But don't worry, this too shall pass, as it has for decades. And we'll get back to normal later. Well, we'll see.
So in other words, this is
a good
kind of
start, though.
In other words, this could be kind of a Mexican deep state piece of propaganda, which is that we're pretending that the cartels are being brought under control.
Si, senor.
See, yes. Okay, all right. Well, that's interesting.
It could, and only time will tell, really, because we don't have a ton of intel on what goes on in Mexico, and including the cartels.
Yeah.
And we focused our intel efforts for the last 25 years on the Middle East and Africa, to the great detriment of the Western Hemisphere, including our own neighbors here. And it's important for people to realize that the Mexican government doesn't control a third of Mexico. A sixth of Mexico is absolutely under the control of these cartels, and another sixth is sort of disputed in various degrees between the cartels and the Mexican state and federal governments. And so they don't have a cohesive country like we do in the United States.
So, Ken, how much power does China wield over this conversation? Because, when we look at the fentanyl supply chain, China is the critical resource from which all of those precursor chemicals are coming. They're selling the equipment that's used to press this fentanyl into pills in Mexico. They have the cartels, as I understand it. Peter Schweitzer wrote a whole book on this subject. They're using encrypted Chinese apps to conduct their operations. It does seem like China is kind of controlling a lot of this.
Well, I wouldn't say controlling. They're definitely benefiting from it from a strategic standpoint. All of this, the cheaper drugs are, the worse off America is. Let's not forget that if Americans just stopped buying illegal drugs, these folks, and now with a closed border with President Trump, these folks would dry up.
Well, sure, but if I can, I'm sorry, just on that point, in my understanding, a lot a lot of the deaths now are from recreational drug consumption, albeit, not appropriate, not prescribed. But people are taking things that they don't realize are fentanyl.
Right, or fentanyl's in it. For the life of me, I don't know why the fentanyl pushers want to do that. All they do is bring more attention, negative attention, and law enforcement attention, and who knows, soon maybe even military attention down on their head with President Trump. And in his first term, President Trump was very determined to drive that fentanyl death number down, and he did. He did. It was still unacceptably high, but he drove it downward instead of seeing it go up as it did under Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think he's willing to take some steps against the cartels that are going to make that even more difficult for the cartels to stay organized and move shipments into this country. But to the China point, they make money off it. Strategically, they benefit from our weakness that results from it. But I wouldn't say they're exercising control over any of the cartels. They're just happy beneficiaries, and they want to both keep it that way and not be seen doing it.
Yeah, well, they're like the world's biggest enablers, at least, which is what's happening right now. So the cartels, how dangerous are they? Because I've seen some chatter on the subject. As President Trump contemplates what he's going to do to get the cartels under control, the terror designation, of course, we got early in the administration, and some thought being given to, do we take military action against the cartels? What does that look like should something like that happen, Ken Cuccinelli?
Well, it looks precision-like. Look, one of the problems with the cartels and why the foreign terrorist designation is difficult to wield here is that we're used to, that statute was written for Islamic cells that were trying to hide and keep to themselves. These folks literally are the governments in their communities. They are running the communities and controlling the communities in their parts of Mexico. That is really not what these statutes were written for. We need to get at the money, and I think we need a new statute. I've talked to several senators about this. We need a new statute that gives more monetary authority to literally hack these folks' accounts and get after their assets. Because unlike those Islamic jihadists who are want to topple the Western civilization, the drug cartels, they just want money. They're just after money. They'll use terrorist tactics to get it, and they have. But their goal is money, and we need to attack the money. And that's a little bit different than attacking Islamic terror cells.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have the intel in place, as I already mentioned. We need to build up our intel capacity with respect to these cartels so we can, we wouldn't say it on the radio, of course, but so that the question can be intelligently answered. If we're going to do one thing militarily, what's the most valuable from both a success, impact, and safety from avoiding collateral damage standpoint?
So there's
a lot to think about there.
There's a lot to consider. You want to do this as safely and efficiently as possible. The New York Times had a report, not an additional report. This is now about half a month ago, and the headline was CIA expands secret drone flights over Mexico. I'm sitting here going, well, it's not a secret anymore, is it? I mean, it's published in the New York Times. And of course, this was credited to anonymous sources who are sharing with the New York Times this classified information, assuming that it's true, that we have these drone flights going over the cartels. It seems like President Trump has people who are still within the deep state here in the United States who are working to subvert this obviously noble mission to save American lives.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to think of a reason to defend the cartels, even in the context of America's deep state battles. I will tell you, though, that when I was in this fight, the existing terror-focused military-industrial complex had no interest in the Western Hemisphere. They wanted to be fighting and observing and spying over in the Middle East and in Africa and Greater Asia. They wanted to be getting after those opponents. They just didn't care about the cartels. The intelligence community, including the military side of it, is not very interested in this target. Now, the president gets to decide,
Yes.
but in the first term, he did not impose those priorities on those institutions. And now he comes in with a whole lot more energy and determination on this front. And I think a lot of them are going to fall into line. That is, doesn't mean there aren't going to be leakers. And as you point out, that's both unpatriotic and dangerous information to leak. But they've also, this administration has also shown a willingness to run those to ground and to bring those consequences to those folks.
Also, as for normal Americans, they look at this and they say, well, this is a direct American interest. It's not in any way some sort of abstract way to connect why Americans should be concerned about it. It's literally our border. It's literally the terror groups that are south of it, and it's killing over 100,000 Americans a year. I don't know if it's even possible to more obviously do the math on what our enemies are.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. It takes a lot more connecting the dots to explain why we've expended 100 or 200 billion in Ukraine than it does why we would pay attention to securing our border and actively taking on the cartels, who, as you note, they're killing more people every year than we lost in the whole war in Vietnam, every single year. And through drug overdose deaths and so forth. They're also running human trafficking rings, including sex trafficking and labor trafficking. There was probably a point in the Biden administration, there were probably several years, where they made more money trafficking people than drugs. Part of the reason was drugs got so cheap because of the open border. And, for those listening, ask cops about the street price of these drugs and what happened to them in the last 5 years and what's happening to them right now. It tells the tale.
Yes.
There are no regulations other than who can catch who on the supply and demand of illegal drugs.
The street price is such an interesting and important piece of data because remember the Biden administration would constantly tell us, "Oh, we've captured even more fentanyl coming through ports of crossing," and they would basically use that as a way to say that they're catching all the fentanyl, which of course they weren't. It's the street price, it's the market forces that really tell you the story.
Right. Absolutely, and that's true regardless of administrations. Everybody wants to look good, right? They pile up the drugs, take a picture, and shoot it out on Twitter. But the fact of the matter is, what does it cost a user to use? And the higher that cost, the less users there are going to be. And the ones that are out there are going to use less. It's just math, Vince. It's just math. And that means less people will die.
Yep.
And it means the cartels are going to make less money, buy less military equipment, destabilize the rest of the Western Hemisphere, including Mexico, less and less. And all of this, where we started our discussion here, is now for the first time seeing some effort on the part of Mexico. Even when Mexico cooperated in the first Trump administration on the immigration front, they never went after the cartels. They never challenged the cartels. There was never a serious effort. What we're seeing now could be the beginning of a sustained effort, but understand the politics of Mexico. This is the second administration in a row, and she's just in the beginning of her 6-year presidency. She is a continuation of AMLO, her predecessor. Some people think she's a puppet of her predecessor, much like people said of Biden via Obama. And they have vehemently, if you can believe that, they have vehemently opposed taking on the cartels. So I'll believe it when I see this sustained for a while. I'll believe it when I start seeing Mexican government officials prosecuted for corruption and working with the cartels.
Yeah.
That'll be the real sign that they're taking this on a long-term basis.
Yep.
And look, if I'm a Mexican, I want my government to control my country. As a simple matter of patriotism and pride, not to mention security and safety for me, my family, my children, and my country.
And for the economy, by the way, because starting tonight, 25% tariff on Mexico because President Trump is right there with you. He doubts they're going to get it under control unless we take some really drastic measures. So that's coming. All right, a lot of things going on today. President Trump announcing $100 billion in investment by TSMC, that big Taiwanese chip maker, right here in the United States, right there in Arizona. President Trump also indicating today that, look, Zelensky should come back to the table. He should be a little contrite, you think? Be a little bit more appreciative, get this mineral deal signed, and let's end this thing. But he's concerned that Zelensky is going to stretch the war into forever because he said Zelensky himself is telling the press, just like, this is going to go on for a very, very long time. Trump indicating today on Truth Social that these are not the kind of statements that are going to help anything at all. In fact, President Trump said, this is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelensky, and America will not put up with it for much longer. It is what I was saying. This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing. And Europe, in the meeting that they had with Zelensky, stated flatly they cannot do the job without the United States. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia. What are they thinking? President Trump trying to introduce reason into the conversation, which there has been far too little of. So we'll get to. And now we got Democrats who are saying, they say the dumbest things. You know, you used to remember kids say the darndest things. And now we have Democrats say the dumbest things. People like Jasmine Crockett down in Texas and Connecticut's Jasmine Crockett, Chris Murphy. They're saying very dumb things out loud in front of microphones, which means I can share them with you. Coming up on the Vince Coglianese Show, that's ahead. Miranda Devine, not far behind. Stay with us. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:35 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up top of the hour, the wonderful Miranda Devine is here. She'll talk to us about Volodymyr Zelensky's awful decisions on Friday, including that outfit. What was he thinking? It was awful. He would not have made it on the Oscars red carpet. Tisk, tisk. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Democrats, quite unfortunately, are lunatics, or too many of them are. They say they don't have a leader right now, and the top contenders for the leader of the Democrat Party at this moment turn out to be Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy and Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. And they're both crazy, which is great. So the more they spend time on TV, the more people think that party's crazy. Here is Jasmine Crockett's latest contribution on MSNBC. Take a listen.
So, unfortunately, we have someone that is occupying the White House. And as far as I'm concerned, he is an enemy to the United States. He swore an oath just like
the guy who was elected by the American people, winning both the Electoral College and the meaningless popular vote, other than just to count the number of people who voted for him. He's an enemy of the United States of America, says Jasmine Crockett.
He's an enemy to the United States. He swore an oath just like the rest of us. But right now, when you are literally putting us at risk, all because of what? Because you want to convince your followers that you should be a dictator too, that you should never leave the White House because you don't believe that elections should take place. I don't really understand what is going on, and I don't know what it's going to take to get people to wake up.
What in the hell is she talking about? He wants to never leave the White House. He wants to be a dictator. He doesn't want elections to take place. Where does she get her news? Because we should bomb that place. Wherever she gets her news from, we should destroy it. It's not serving her well. She is so misled, poor girl. Isn't that crazy? What is she basing that on? Nothing. Whose party likes to stop elections? It's the left. Whose party wants to remove their political opponents from the ballot? That's the left. That's the left. Whose party wants to imprison their political opponents to prevent them from winning an election fair and square? That's the left. Who wants to rig the way we conduct our votes? That's the left. Who wants to rig the information system necessary to make an informed decision about who you vote for? Oh, that's the left. That's been the left. So the Trump White House is actually expanding media access, and that gets turned into a big scale. What a fascist. What an authoritarian. They're letting more news outlets in? What? That's crazy. That's so Hitler-y of them to let more news outlets into the White House. Yeah. And Jasmine Crockett says that means Trump's a dictator. So, up is down, black is white, the grass is blue. They just make it up. They just make it up. It's all projection. CNN's Chris Murphy. CNN, excuse me. He could be CNN's Chris Murphy. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, appearing on CNN, had this to say yesterday.
So it is absolutely shameful what is happening right now. The White House has become an arm of the Kremlin. Every single day, you hear from the National Security Advisor, from the President of the United States, from his entire national security team, Kremlin talking points.
No, you hear American talking points. That's actually what you hear. You hear talking points that are emanating out of what is the best for our country and our people. You are not familiar with those because you never use those.
For the last week, the White House has been pretending as if Ukraine started this war. That's essentially saying that Poland invaded Germany.
We're going to get into this, started the war, who provoked who, all of that in a moment. And I have a little teaser for you. Chris Murphy plays a starring role.
At the beginning of World War II, there are still facts in this world. And the fact is this: Vladimir Putin is a brutal dictator. Russia started this war. And the entire pretext for that meeting yesterday was an attempt to rewrite history in order to sign a deal with Putin that hands Putin Ukraine. That is disastrous for U.S. national security. That means that China will be on the march. Putin may not stop. America may be at war with a nuclear power.
We're going to be at war with a nuclear power. So let me understand all of this correctly. Trump's strategy is going to lead us closer to nuclear war, says Chris Murphy. Chris Murphy's strategy is, how do we get Ukraine into NATO so we can trigger a nuclear war? But what is he talking about? Again, projection. Up is down. The grass is blue.
And for what? For what? It appears as if America is trying to align itself with dictators, that Donald Trump wants us to have our closest relationships with despots all around the world, because that makes it easier for him.
How disgusting is this human being? You know, millions of people should keep on dying. This is good. We should keep doing this, says Chris Murphy. Trump argues for peace, and that makes him the friend of dictators. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm allow Chris Murphy to develop this stupid point. Listen to this whole thing.
Trying to align itself with dictators, that Donald Trump wants us to have our closest relationships with despots all around the world, because that makes it easier for him to transition America into a kleptocratic oligarchy where Elon Musk and Donald Trump rule and steal from the American people. If we were allied with democracies, that would be harder. But if the United States' closest partner is Russia, then it makes it a lot easier for Donald Trump, Elon, and their billionaire pals to steal from the American people, to steal our data, to steal our Medicare, to steal our Medicaid in order to enrich themselves.
Is that the most psychotic thing you've heard today? And I played Jasmine Crockett for you. We just heard from Chris Murphy. He's buddying up to Putin because then that'll condition the rest of us to be pro-authoritarian, and then we'll allow Donald Trump to be an authoritarian for life, and he's going to cut your Medicaid. What? How did the Medicaid thing get into this? What are you even talking about? Nothing. He's just being emotionally incontinent on national television. That's Chris Murphy. Now, Chris Murphy on this issue of Ukraine. And who started the war? Who started all of this? Do you know, just to remind people the order of events, 2014, that's the year that Vladimir Putin, the Russians, they invade Crimea. I think everybody knows that. That was 2014. And then things were relatively quiet during the Trump era, as President Trump has reminded you ceaselessly. And then when Biden comes into office, Putin moves on Ukraine, invades, tries to send guys into Kiev, and is seizing all sorts of territory, killing lots of people, millions of casualties that have ensued since happening under the Biden administration. Again, none of it happened during Trump. But where I started was the invasion of Crimea, March of 2014. Do you know what happened in February of 2014, right before the invasion of Crimea? It was the overthrow of the government in Ukraine. It was the Maidan Revolution in February of 2014. And in America, in establishment Washington, there's often a game of pretend that's played that, this was just a popular uprising in Ukraine. They overthrew the pro-Russian government, and then they decided to vote for something better. This is the way it's basically described, the storybook explanation of what happened, the series of events. But occasionally, some of these guys, they couldn't help themselves. They would straight up brag that they overthrew the existing Ukrainian government and its president, Yanukovych, who, yes, was friendly to Russia, that they were involved in overthrowing him. And it's great for the world that we overthrew Yanukovych in 2014. Who said that out loud? Who said that out loud? Who was that? Oh, that was Senator Christopher Murphy of Connecticut. Listen to this guy.
I think it was our role, including sanctions and threats of sanctions, that forced, in part, Yanukovych from office. Now, the question is, what can we do to support this new government? There's going to be a lot of talk about an assistance package. With respect to Ukraine, we have not sat on the sidelines. We have been very much involved. Members of the Senate who have been there, members of the State Department who have been on the square. The Obama administration passed sanctions. The Senate was prepared to pass its own set of sanctions. And as I said, I really think that the clear position of the United States has in part been what has helped lead to this change in regime. So
I don't know what else to say. Hello, McFly. Are you listening to this? So you had establishment Washington, whose face is represented by the Dennis the Menace lookalike, Chris Murphy, coming out and going, yeah, of course we overthrew the government. And that's only what he said on C-SPAN. That's what he wanted to report to you on Washington Journal way back in 2014. Our thanks, by the way, to Kanekoa the Great on X for pulling that clip, reminding all of us of who said what at the time. But Chris Murphy said that. Chris Murphy said they were bragging about it. Look how good this is. Man, this is great. Regime change. We did it again. Everyone giving themselves a pat on the back. The world's going to be so much better now. You should thank us. Where's my thank you? Where's my thank you? And instead, what they did was they began a series of events that have induced horrific chaos. Horrific chaos. And what Chris Murphy didn't say in the public part of this interview is what role the CIA played. What role USAID played as a cutout for the CIA. What role all of these mostly unseen forces played in cultivating regime change in Ukraine, which it turns out didn't lead to utopia. It didn't lead to a dreamland. It didn't lead to a flourishing, wonderful, liberal democracy that everybody's happy now and they've all got their pot of gold. Everybody's skipping around. It's not happening. It's not happening. In fact, instead, we're getting catastrophic bloodshed and a loss of entire generations of Ukrainian men. The country's in complete chaos. And you have people in Washington who are still dead enders on this subject because they already started driving us off a cliff and they don't want you to notice that they're the ones in the driver's seat. They've got to keep driving. Got to keep driving. What? At the expense of American treasure? And potentially, if we let them continue to dictate the outcome here, American blood. And that can't happen. So these are the forces that President Trump is fighting against. He's fighting against people who have made this country, this world, this planet a lot less safe. A lot less safe. And he wants to bring about a peace. He's saying it's time to negotiate. You've got to talk to everybody. You have to. You have Reagan speaking to the Soviets, trying to bring about a peace. You have Trump talking to Vladimir Putin, Vladimir Zelensky, saying it's time to bring about a peace. And the American people are wildly supportive of President Trump's agenda here. Wildly so. More so than what was that guy's name? Oh, Joe Biden. By 24 points. Listen to the enthusiastic Harry Enton today describe on CNN just how pro-Trump the American people are when it comes to Ukraine.
Well, I think the easiest way we can kind of just ask this is, do Americans like the way that Trump's handling his job and compare it to how they felt about Joe Biden? So this is the net approval rating. You look at Joe Biden back in 2024, he was 22 points underwater. Holy cow.
Yeah, zoink, Scoob. What's going on over there? 22 points? Can you believe these numbers?
You look at Donald Trump, it's just a different planet entirely. I mean, the gulf between these two is wider than the Gulf of America or Mexico, depending on which side of the aisle you stand on. He's at +2. So
this guy's so zany, Credit to, okay, so I'm hoping that whoever hired Harry Enton is the same person who hired Scott Jennings. Like, somebody at CNN is making wise decisions because this guy's making the numbers like, he's like the John Madden of polling. He's like just very excited, very excited. He's like almost like John Gruden, actually, very excited by what he's watching right now.
Look, at this particular point, Americans are giving Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt. He's doing considerably better than Joe Biden was doing on the handling of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so on this simple question, I think Americans are saying, okay, Donald Trump's doing all right on this.
They look at these numbers and they say the last guy, he was stinky. The new guy smells fantastic. That's the walk. That's the takeaway here. Thank you very much. Harry Enton assessing the numbers, which you can detect not by watching CNN, but by talking to normal people all around you who are saying, what? What are we doing? What's the end game? What are we doing? And so President Trump's trying to provoke an end here. And last thing on President Trump's deal-making abilities. First of all, they're proven. Second of all, have you been on X lately? Have you seen all of everyone's like hemming and hawing, I don't know if he's doing the right thing. I'm so glad that most of X is not president of the United States. You have a bunch of hysterical fainting goats that are all over social media just panicking about everything. Trump's... No. The status quo ain't working. The status quo is Chris Murphy overthrowing governments and then bragging about it and then leading to catastrophic chaos. That's the status quo. Trump is the answer to that. That's why he got elected twice. Actually, maybe 3 times. 449. All right, so Jasmine Crockett, Chris Murphy, they're disappointing spokesmembers for their party. What about flatulent Eric Swalwell?
If you look around the world, our biggest economic enemy is China. Our biggest geopolitical enemy is Russia. In a matter of 3 years, without losing a single U.S. soldier, we have decimated their military and their economy. It's been the greatest return on investment for any military expenditure ever. And as far as the return on investment for soldiers' lives, it's infinity because you can't divide zero.
This man should be nowhere near the levers of power ever again. That's some of the dumbest analysis I've ever heard uttered on national television. And yet there he was on CNN. They were nodding along thoughtfully. Interesting that you say that. One of the best military expenditures, not one of, the greatest investment for any military expenditure ever. He may be missing a huge number of wars that may have been much more meaningful, had some value. We'll start with the Revolutionary War, perhaps. Civil War, keep the Union together. World Wars I and II. There's a big list, actually. But Swalwell's not aware of that list. He just said, this is the greatest. I can't believe it. And also, how callous is it for him to stand there and say, oh, isn't this wonderful? How many Ukrainians are dead? They're being used as cannon fodder. They're walking into a buzzsaw. And it hasn't diminished Russian military capability. In fact, do you know what it's actually done? You talk to veterans, talk to guys in the military who are involved in this kind of planning, who have been in this kind of war fighting. You're realizing you are generating a battle-hardened military in Russia that has battle experience? A lot. So they're one of our biggest geopolitical foes. So you're giving them target practice for years on end at American expense? That's what you're doing? They are. They're creating a veteran military force in Russia, an experienced military force in Russia. That's what they're doing. This is not redounding to anyone's benefit. What a goon Eric Swalwell is to go on TV and say that, to continue supporting this. It's awful. And it's a sign of his lack of ethics or his lack of brain cells, one or the other. But that's Eric Swalwell, sitting member of Congress, representing the Democrats. Coming up, Miranda Devine will be with us. We will chat with her about what was Zelensky thinking. What was that on Friday? The White House was ready to sign a deal. They thought it was a done deal. They had all the chairs set up, the lecterns, the fancy markers, and then Zelensky went crazy. Miranda Devine explains why next.